Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka the Movie Mystic. If you enjoy these film reviews, then please press the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay in the know. Subscribing to this channel means you get to watch the coolest new film industry interviews, hear some groovy film reviews, and get some live streams too. Number 39. The bizarre Taiwanese rom-com that is Someone in the Clouds has an angle that is astrological, which should be viewed as fun mumbo jumbo unless taken seriously. Then it is harmful. Astrology is usually harmless fun, so making a romantic comedy instead of some violent fantasy movie through this point of view makes sense because people go to astrologists to delude themselves about their sex life and career. Every culture has their own historical approach with astrology, so to see the current Taiwanese angle is pretty cool, but in the end this film becomes somewhat typical and an insufferable sugar-high comedy. The clairvoyants are pretty cool though, so is the weird low-budget supernatural scenes, which look awful, but are charming in what is probably an intentional way. However, it is the hammy acting that is unbearable. The trope of hate each other, love each other, hate each other, then finally love each other gets pretty annoying in rom-coms, and this film doesn't enhance that obnoxious quality with the mentioned sugar-high tone. If you like rom-coms from Hollywood, then you might like Asian rom-coms, but like Hollywood ones, they aren't universally bad, but they're mostly bad, so keep all that in mind, and try not to pass out from the sugar high. Number 38. Let's talk about the movie A Resistance. When I studied script writing at Algonquin College, an instructor told me that when the story goes to prison, the story is essentially done. This movie starts in prison and ends in prison. It's as if the storyline is finished in the first frame. That's not to say that good prison movies don't exist. There are plenty of them. However, this one isn't particularly strong. The film takes place in 1919 Japanese-occupied Seoul, Korea, and looks at a year-long saga of a locked-up 17-year-old resistance fighter in captivity. The film is shot in black and white, which makes it reminiscent of Schindler's List, which makes the film unfortunately come across as derivative. The grievous narrative is justified, but it also gets boring and stuffy, especially for a non-Korean. Perhaps an olive branch approach to show more humanity in the Japanese occupiers would have broken levity or made the drama more complex. The actors do what they can with the material, but no one shines given the two-dimensional script. Too bad! Number 37. The police procedural dark figure of crime is unfortunately as generic as its title, which leaves nothing to suggestion. It merely presents a scenario of a wider scheme to reveal that there is just a horrific guy who did a horrific thing. The twist and turns are nothing that would be seen in an Alfred Hitchcock film or read in an Agatha Christie book. It is within a cool genre, but adds nothing to it other than just existing, which is a total waste. Before he made Shoplifters, Horikoshi Korida made the excellent film called The Third Murder, and in South Korea there was Memories of Murder by Bong Joon-ho back in 2003. So for those who want to see an Asian police procedural, they are much better off with those two films. The cop and robber have exchanges with each other. The cop investigates, and then they go back to the same thing until the movie is over. For a very inspired scenario, the exchanges are not all that great by the end, although they do start off to be a little freaky in the beginning. But this true story South Korean police procedural just never finds a way to distinguish itself from already very good or great films in the genre. Number 36. The Crossing. Let's talk about The Crossing. This Chinese coming-of-age drama looks at criminal smuggling of iPhones from just outside of Hong Kong to mainland China by a 16-year-old girl in a pretty not-too-compelling story. PP is the name of the 16-year-old female protagonist, and while it is not unheard of that respectable people do terrible things, her draw and seduction into the game seems implausible since the gangsters are unlikable and obnoxious. PP is a pretty girl. Why did she seemingly randomly fall in with this group? She's committing these crimes for her trip to Japan with her friends, but it still seems like a flimsy motivation and not very captivating stakes for this movie. There's little felt pressure in this film. It goes through the rise and fall in the criminal road trope, and circa the 1932 Scarface gives the government public service announcement saying that the government will get you if you break the law. Certainly it seems a little strange that Chinese censors would have to remind their citizens of this. However, you probably shouldn't watch the movie if the opportunity arises, because it is rather light. Number 35. Okay, we're going to talk about a movie called The Scoundrels. So this high-octane action brofest is a decent Taiwanese film, but perhaps is a lower-tier shoot-'em-up, even though there is a nice use of color, but not much investment in characters or story. The film does provide action, but it is neither inspired nor very engaging. If you isolate the fight scenes and wanted to impress someone, simply with that, which does not really work for a 105-minute experience. John Woo's The Killer is a masterpiece, not simply because of the distinguished choreography and visuals, but because it is complicated with strong exaggerated personas who play off each other like they're different instruments in a great band. It's fine to want to see a mindless action movie, but some inspired characters and a strong storyline within the context of the action is still necessary. Mindless entertainment needs some subtle arrangement in the script, maybe more than any other genre. Seeing a basketball player fall from grace and go gully to then survive in the end just did not cut it for this film critic as an action film that deserves recommendation, and the use of his love interest was especially worthless. The love interest, though, serves as a healthy metaphor for this entire experience. No chemistry. Number 34. Talking about the movie Winter After Winter. Manchurians occupied by the Japanese in 1944 is the setting for this film, but it is the filmmaking approach which is most interesting. It is shot in black and white and has plenty of long shots with no cuts. It is the lighting with black and white with strong contrast that allow the emotions to set in through the long shots, because cutting typically is more effective in movies despite there being loads of cool twists and turns of the camera to be seen in the movie. It's a little relentless in the depressing tone, which is inevitable for this story, but when it comes to A Resistance, which also plays at the New York Asian Film Festival and has been reviewed on ckcufm.com, it remains a stronger film. Masaki Kobayashi's incredibly long trilogy, The Human Condition, also falls into the same category of A Resistance and Winter After Winter, which is more of a boring history lesson than well-done cinema, instead of an inventive scenario which shines light on history. If there is a well-done Asian film about real-life imprisonment in the 20th century, this reviewer hasn't seen it. While there are certainly ones better than others, perhaps the next filmmaker who takes on this subgenre will be a little bit more inventive and less preachy. The history remains important, but the storytelling also remains the same, and it is pretty. Number 33. Let's talk about the movie Move the Grave. Road trips with family members can be hard, as is a death in a family. So when you combine both, you have a movie which is funny, obnoxious, emotional, and ambitious, making the end product a notch above middle of the road. The family members are all dysfunctional in their own different way. However, it is a stretch to say that they all have unique character voices. They kind of drown each other out at points, but all seem equally angry. There's no leader in the cast, no one to see the forest through the trees on a consistent basis, but the film does have some larger-than-life moments for a road movie, which is a genre which inherently has some challenges. The biggest problem in this genre is not all that much happens. Sometimes, which is the case with this one, the story doesn't really evolve. It's just a journey to a destination with some good moments, then it's over. That being said, the chubby characters are fun and speaks to all the troubled families, which is every family at the end of the day, so there's a certain sweetness that is presented in the chaos of this film. Number 32. It is hard to imagine a movie for kids about a young man turning himself and his dog into a shape-shifting demon to get on the good side of a female shape-shifting demon getting produced in Hollywood. It might be totally justified that is the case. However, the animated White Snake is the Chinese solution to that issue, which is kind of a wonderful but surreal experience. The film becomes especially difficult to follow its Taoist mythology that few non-Chinese will know about, and the use of it seems to suggest there's a demonic hierarchy and mortals, but no divine figure that is mortal. The buddy dog even gets to talk in this movie, which can only be seen to be believed, and since he mainly is a background, he kind of becomes like Samuel L. Jackson's schizophrenic projection of himself in Afro Samurai. The animation isn't on Pixar's level, but that should not be a deal breaker. It might just be what kind of message you want to send to your kids. However, it is an interesting history level of sorts, and certainly very trippy. Number 31. The film The Rib looks at a transgender woman living in China and the acceptance she needs from her Christian father in order to get his signature to get the operation she needs to avoid depression and even worse. Instead of this film antagonizing those who believe in Christianity, it has a beautiful message of reconciliation and acceptance for those who differ in the belief of gender being fluid instead of rigid. The transgender community in China faced disrespect by leaving the door to walk in the world, but the idea of maintaining grace and dignity despite the possibility of being murdered because of your identity is extremely powerful and works well for a drama. The stakes are so real, and the use of black and white works metaphorically in this contemporary debate, where we are either for or against the topic instead of trying to empathize and understand the other perspective. If this film does not move you by the end, then perhaps you are too rigid against the trans community, but the filmmakers love you anyways, since this film is way more open and at peace with humanity than you may assume it is. Number 30. Ma is more proof that the Philippine film industry is back on the rise. A creepy premise of kids committing murder for no real end makes you wonder when people will stop trusting spirits. The spirit promises the kids that if they kill specific people and let this demonic shrubbery suck their energy, that they'll have their mother back, and perhaps we should give the kids a pass since they're too young to have seen this type of movie before. This film is well shot, and the kids act well, or at least seem sincere in their performances, and the music is really solid, which is integral to the success of the atmosphere in any horror movie, whether it is bold or spare. The thing that makes this film a little lame is the demonic shrubbery, which really looks bad despite the voice actor being creepy and fun. The fact is, it does minimize the element of fear becoming unintentionally funny. The premise is well written, and with strong understanding of this material, the actors all add something to this creepy flick, but my favorite thing has to be the score, since it does create a strong sense of ambiance, which is integral to horror. Number 29. While the Philippines has Buy Bus and Indonesia has The Raid, Vietnam is trying to cash in similarly with their film Fury. While all three films are fun, insane, and implausible, Fury is just not as good as the previous two films. Veronica Nago of Star Wars The Last Jedi fame stars as Hai Fuan, who extorts people until one day the changing tides of the criminal underworld turn against her. Her daughter gets kidnapped, and she runs around trying to get her back. Simplicity is necessary for this kind of movie, but the acting isn't as strong as it should be. A fun romp equals good cinema, but this isn't a particularly fun one. The exaggerated lighting is the best thing going on in this film, while the choreography is competent, but without much heart. Number 28. Can samurai movies be hangout movies? Yes, they can. The palace intrigue story about the end of the Japanese isolation era with Americans coming to do state business takes place with an interesting cast of characters and a good mix of hilarity. Running away from everyone and everything seems appropriate in this lighthearted take on Japan in 1855. It is an entertaining film by British director Bernard Rose, and even has a score by Candyman composer Philip Glass. My one complaint is it's pretty middle of the road, despite being competently shot and acted. The story won't stay with you at all, really. Number 27. Zombie Pura is a zombie comedy from Singapore. It's as if Edgar Wright made Shaun of the Dead in Singapore, but went for Day of the Dead in a comedic way. The film has no big missteps and does a run-of-the-mill trying to contain a zombie apocalypse in a military base storyline before it spreads in a comedic way. The writer and director Jackson Tan clearly respects and likes the material he is working with, and it is always good to have a sense that the creators are having fun. With one cut of the Dead, which screened at the last New York Asian Film Festival and of course Train to Busan, it's great that Asians are getting their own subgenre within this zombie film as of late. Zombie Pura rarely lags in action or wide-eyed panic, and it should satisfy your hunger for flesh, or at least this take on the genre. Number 25. Quirky is the name of the game in hardcore, which is a comedy that can only come from Japan, since it deals with two awkward loners who hang out with a robot and are trying to find some lost gold from a shogun. That synopsis cannot be written for any other country other than Japan, unless that country was remaking this or paying homage to Japan, which makes this film's zaniness charming and perhaps difficult to appreciate because of its regional flair. So if you have a Japanese sense of humor, or can at least appreciate that, then this film is for you. Otherwise, it's a big skip, because this film never slows down for you or explains itself, which is kind of a beautiful thing. The eternal loneliness in a certain type of Japanese man is a constant in Japanese cinema because it is a constant in Japanese society. So this film can be perceived as misogynistic, since the principal characters don't know anything about women other than they are attracted to them. There is an S&M scene, and the Japanese are known for their wild depictions of sex for the didactic reason that they are a repressive society. But if you can get beyond that, then maybe this film is for you. If you want to take off with a robot buddy and don't think depiction of gender relations is a deal breaker, then this movie is going to be totally fine for you. Number 25. The movie Still Human is typical in an emotional story sense, but has a feeling of being genuine, as it looks at a cantankerous old Chinese man and his young female Filipino caretaker as they learn to appreciate one another. The notion of love is one that isn't for material gain, but simply to appreciate someone else, which might be a basic message, but an important one nevertheless, when we seek love from a partner. It starts crashly, then develops into a pleasant story about redemption, friendship, connection, and appreciating your friend for who they are, instead of what you want to project or falsely expect from another person. If this type of heartwarming film is your cup of tea, you'll already be on board, but if it is not an automatic go, go to, then reconsider this particular film because it really does stand out amongst other kinds of films like this. The Dirty Apartment does not simply come across as exotic, but a sense of life lived instead of something emotionally implausible. The story does seem genuine in its sweetness, and the direct emotion is not conceited or cynical. It is all for real in a movie sense. Number 24, the Filipino movie Single Rock has a very interesting subject matter, which is what happens to communities when women marry foreigners to get out of their unfortunate economic circumstances. Plenty of Canadian men of different nationalities have Filipino wives. And see a movie that takes the perspectives of the families and friends who lose a woman close to them because of this is totally worth a movie. The answer as to what happens to them is that they suffer and are humiliated, and they have to live with this reality simply because of where they were born instead of being competent or incompetent people. Some of the scenes are heartbreaking, but gratitude seems to be around the corner for the protagonist in Toy, despite it never actually coming towards him, and the last few scenes are frankly humiliating to watch. The movie does get a little one-noted, and it may have been nice for it to be structured a little bit better. However, it is a sociological film, one that has a question without an answer, or at least a quick answer. The fact seems to be, you can be a great lover, but without financial support, your love will grow still quick in this world we live in. And economic improvement can be generated, so in your lifetime, you can be totally out of luck in this regard. Ouch. Number 23, talking about the movie Walk With Me. The number of people you can trust in this world of an atmospheric yet still jump scare horror movie is not going to be very high, as is shown in this Malaysian horror movie, where the aesthetic is both high and low. The film is in the tradition of Val Lewton, and that atmosphere and feeling are there, but there are also abrupt cuts to something horrific, which makes it like a 90s camp horror film, and the end result is a strong mixed bag. The horror really boils down to the issue of trust, as well as all human relations become up for grab gradually. But surely, once visions of terror get in the mix, it affects everyone around the female protagonist, played by Emily Kwan. The film is standard in a sense, but compared to 2018, May the Devil Take You from Indonesia, it is a spirit film with its pacing in the script, which is gradual but rarely boring, and effects which are pretty strong. The sense of paranoia and downfall is ever present, so the real-life fear it taps into are good, but it is the visuals from time to time that waken what is strong about the movie, which is the expression of not being able to trust anyone. Number 22. Japan has some incredibly repressed individuals, but because of that, some of the most expressive, but it comes out in the art. They do not feel differently than other cultures, and that is evident in Lion to Mom. The subject matter is incredibly dark, so it will clearly not be for everyone. It is about covering up suicide for the mom in the title of the movie, and how a family is affected by this total trauma. Suicide seems to go against human instinct, which is usually to survive, and the pain that it inflicts on loved ones knows no end. So if we don't learn how to communicate with the mentally ill, we simply will keep seeing this act performed. It is not right to judge those who commit this act, as they will never know the extent of their suffering that they've inflicted, and this film becomes beautiful in its completely depressing subject matter. It is more transcendental information than entertainment. There is levity, but it is in a dark way. But if you have someone commit suicide in your life, or someone you think is capable of doing it, this movie might be a huge release. If you see your life in a Japanese movie scenario, maybe is satisfying more than entertaining. The medium of cinema is believed to entertain, but at times it could do something else, which helps us connect with each other to see that it is okay, see what it is to be human in sometimes an extreme way, but that should be deemed okay. The film is heavy from start to finish, but from a writing perspective, it flows quite well, and we really get to explore the experience of grief, which is something that can't be simply gotten over or snapped out of. We stay with it for over 2 hours, but no, others face it much more than that in their lives. While it's not an easy watch, it is very good and will appeal to some people. Number 21, talking about the movie A First Farewell. You may not know anything about the Uyghur, but after this movie, you will get a solid impression of their unfortunately sad lives. So this movie does a solid job depressing the viewer without going into grief porn territory. Getting a sense of a different culture's lifestyle is not the only thing foreign films could do, but getting that done well usually plays well for Western audiences. But it is not necessarily baity as well. It can be really dramatically satisfying. While the film may not be incredible, the quiet empathy and somewhat documentary style examining the lives of primarily Uyghur children, who do poorly in school but are generally not appreciated within China. Muslims in China and Burma are discriminated against as they are in North America and Europe, but it's still important to see what it's like in Asia, and this film does that by showing how the marginalization is done. The problem may be that children actors have a hard time performing since they lack emotional and intellectual maturity, so they rarely show subtlety, but they are very cute, so it's hard not to root for any child. The acting works to an extent in the same sense that the story does. It is unorthodox but gives you a sense of a specific story of oppression, which may not be enough for you, but as far as the rules are set up, it is for 20. We're talking about the movie $5 Million Life. How could anyone else make a comedy about suicide than the Japanese? This road movie about a young man named Murari Tatsuki trying to go out into the world prematurely to make money to pay for his unfortunate medical expenses, to then kill himself, is very charming in a perverse way. But is it actually perverse if it's cultural? What is interesting about the film is that it has fun with dark subject matter without having an absurdist nihilist tone or sugar high comedic pitch. It is more just a strong but not untypical film for Japan. The characters think that the lead is crazy, but then again, they're all a little off and are charmed by him. So it is all mostly pleasantness in this unique experience that should give some cultural insight and hopefully will charm you. Perhaps this is too taboo for you to laugh at, but film can be a healthy way to explore this kind of material. In fact, it can kind of be a relief to watch a story so screwed up without any personal consequences. The journey is what this film is all about, and although it explores incredibly messed up emotional territory, if you make it to the ending of the film, you won't hate the world that allowed this film to be made, and you will most likely be relieved. Number 19. The film Uncle and House is quite interesting, as it looks at one particular criminal who is from a well-off background as well as internationally educated, who decides to work within a gang, who works in counterfeiting money. The movie looks at a 100 won bill traveling around a Chinese town, from the young to the old, and how the people are all connected in a somewhat genuine, close-knit community, but are distant from each other because of greed. The impact of this affluent gangster using his privilege to then be a bad example in a small community is pretty provocative, as we see the children discuss him in a fully aware ways while being totally perplexed, as are the gangsters. But it is the idea of searching for something real, innovative, and visionary through the criminal world, which is not intellectual, but is certainly gritty and real. So, of course, they are counterfeiting reality to an extent. There have been movies to use the counterfeit money scheme as a metaphor, such as personal relationships in L.A., in the film To Live and Die in L.A., as well as Identity in the recent Chow Yun-Fat movie Project Gutenberg. This movie is a bit grittier, though. Despite feeling like a movie, it is not as glossy as previously mentioned films, and the idea of someone leaving behind their affluence to strive for something real, despite being confused, is quite interesting. Number 18. Talking about the movie Sub-Zero Wind. While there are no acts of physical violence and barely any raised voices in this film, it does get incredibly emotionally draining by the end, by the sheer difficulty of making something of yourself in contemporary times. South Korea is no different, apparently, and this raising a family drama at every turn consistently goes downbeat, which makes it somewhat hard to appreciate since no one really displays the charisma to justify this. Perhaps that is just a Hollywood effect. After a certain amount of time, one expects everyone to either be beautiful, charming, or a combination of both, but this has a pessimism found in social realist dramas of another time. The story of a young lady, Yun Ha, and her cousin Mi Jin is a constant seeking of stability within an unstable world that the adult characters are able to give, then the young girls inherit nothing but suffering. The film is pretty good, but lacks any escapist appeal or much relief, which zaps the energy it's presumably trying to get, but regardless, the directorial debut of Kim Yo-ri is strong, and it is a career to follow in the upcoming years. Number 17. If You Are Happy is a legitimately excellent drama that plays out like a tight Hitchcock thriller while exposing actual economic and social justice to China. So if you're looking for something totally adult, totally thrilling, in a real-life sort of way, then this movie is for you. The film tells the story of Professor Fu bribing and pulling all kinds of shade to get rid of his house, to get in the zone that ensures that his daughter gets the best future possible, because the zones you live in determine the school you could go to. It's a sad reality that where you were born will largely determine your outcome in life, contradicting the notion that capitalist freedom allows for social mobility, and if you work really hard, your dreams are attainable. What's excellent about this film is it is a realistic drama. It's never boring, and still follows this ticking clock thriller formula because Professor Fu only has so much time to get everything lined up, so the tension is palpable throughout. The fact that people look like real people and aren't all dolled up adds to the realistic atmosphere, and to see Professor Fu, who starts with only good intentions, be revealed to be a degenerate was fun to see. The scariest thing about this movie is that it is based on a true story, and the communist critique on modern Chinese society does pack a lot of punch. There are even testimonials from real people during the... Number 16. Sinkholes and Fishes are images used memorably in Maggie, a very interesting absurdist comedy from South Korea, which looks at a couple who get caught in the moment in an x-ray at a hospital. The idea of life as a randomly destructive sinkhole, and we are mindless fish waiting to fall into it, is surreally intense, but it is really a funny movie more than a fatal surrealist film, so it shouldn't scare you away if you don't like or know about Alejandro Jodorowsky. Instead, the film is a pleasant romp into surrealism, looking at different personalities in a relationship clashing. She's got a job, and he's spunky. It is apparent that it becomes a debate of rationalism versus irrationalism in the end, and the best way to embody that debate is through the metaphor of a relationship, which makes for an interesting film, especially in the first and third acts. Doing surrealism well is difficult, though, and this film does kind of lie there in a way that could have been improved in the writing phase of the film. But it's always fun to see this style of film, and some of the images are released. Number 15. If a film can use a single visual as a metaphor for the theme of a film effectively, then it's already a pretty solid movie. The Taiwanese film Han Dan accomplishes through the use of fireworks. It represents both chaos, sheer beauty, and metaphorically represents the relationship of two frenemies. Han Dan is a Taiwanese deity, and where fire and punishment is a form of atonement, and it is the spiritual element that enriches the story of a love triangle and drug addiction. It elevates it to make this trope work visually. The actors deliver nuanced performances in a drama that deals with the big emotional subjects such as love and loss and a transient life, and it is that lapse of time improving the film as it allows for the showing of growth and regression. While acting style and maybe the music as well might not allow a newbie with Asian movies to fully appreciate the depth of this film, those who have been watching them for years will see this as the strong dramatic work that it is. Number 14. Wushu Orphan is a Chinese drama that is very interesting work that is reminiscent of Luchino Visconti's Death and Menace, in which an older man sees himself in a younger man, reminds us that growing pains are a constant throughout life. The setting is the 1990s in a martial arts school for orphans or abandoned kids, with an emphasis on the physical over mental side of Kung Fu. Hence the idolization of Bruce Lee. The kids touch his face on a poster before they leave the class every day. Enter the new teacher Lu Ho Hong, who wants to emphasize intellect for these rough kids, which seems laughable. However, he does connect with a student named Jane Gushan, a child who we see try to escape the school in the first scene. The principal of the school is a typically stoic character, but also the acting and writing mocks the archetype of the patriarchal figure, which was fun as well. There is a love story, and all in all, this is just solid emotional content. It never gets too weepy or too apologetic for its open style, leading the end result to be a very good film that people at all stages of life will be able to identify with. No one ever feels totally comfortable where they are, and we all yearn to be accepted for our own virtues instead of what the group thinks suggests for us. Number 13. Dare to Stop Us. It's like the Boogie Nights from Japan. Wakamatsu Koji has an auteur vision for Japanese cinema but can't fill a theater. The story of his softcore filmmaking is charming and full of charisma. However, why do period movies look like they're filmed today? It is a current trend that is not a good one. The story does also lose energy and fizzle out near the end of its 2-hour running time. The fact that this filmmaker has a biopic is wonderful, though, and the spunky counterculture turned mainstream storyline is cute. If a Kaji biopic comes out because of this, it'll have been totally justified. Otherwise, it's solid content, but it is not quite matched up to the ambition of the concept of this story. Number 12, Master Z Ip Man Legacy is a fun one. If you are a fan of martial arts cinema, and of Bruce Lee specifically, you need to see the Ip Man movies that are based on the life of the man who trained Bruce Lee. The first film is a classic of the 2000s. Ip Man 2 and 3 build the world with memorable performances from Sammo Hung and Mike Tyson. Actor Jin Zhan is in Ip Man 3 as Chun Tin Chi, a challenger to Ip Man to be the master of the Wing Chun Kung Fu. While Chun Tin Chi fails to defeat Ip Man in Ip Man 3, he is certainly worthy of his own spin-off story, seen in Master Z Ip Man Legacy. The film builds and does not diminish the world that started over 10 years ago in the first Ip Man film. The film is somewhat standard for a martial arts one, and that is totally fine. It delivers the goods. It's directed by Yuen Woo-pin, who recently directed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon 2, Sword of Destiny, but also did the fight choreography for The Matrix and Kill Bill films. Number 11. While The Fable is certainly reminiscent of the zany work of Takashi Miike's stuff, it also is reminiscent of Branded to Kill. In Branded to Kill, every assassin is given a number in a criminal hierarchy. In The Fable, clearly the main character is the number one. He runs around with his sister, who lures people in with her sexuality. Fable clearly has no competition in his field whatsoever. Then the big boss forces the Fable to lay low because that's what normal people do. Fable hangs out with some difficulty. But how long is that supposed to last? To criticize this film from a realistic or logical standpoint is no fun. It's not trying to be anything other than aesthetic, and achieves that B-grade Takashi Miike's style that it is clearly going for. Number 10. Director Leon Lee has accomplished much with his debut feature film, Son Lang, which tells the story of a gangster named Thunderbolt who extorts people for a living, but like any human being, can be touched and moved. In Nazi-occupied Poland, some Jewish artists were treated differently because of their ability to move Nazi soldiers' music, because virtually all of us can appreciate beauty, and people who lead horrific lives are no different. To see this story told in Vietnam during the 80s was truly a treat, and it is the K Lung folk opera that moves Thunderbolt to friendship with Ling Pung, who does this opera, creating a seemingly bizarre yet understandable kinship. The photography, lights, and setting are simply hypnotic, making it impossible to not be entranced by this material if you engage with it. In fact, it is shot so well that members of the crew should be incorporated into Hollywood. The film speaks to our desire to be better than something than what we currently are, and that art has the ability to help realize our aspirations of who we want to be so that we can live our best life despite past transgressions. It is emotionally fluid in the scripts, and everything flows both naturally, so it is not some loose concept. It is all on display on the screen through the beautiful acting, and of course, much of the credit lies with the book. Number 9. The issue of immigration dominates the news cycle, but before it was trendy, Japan has always maintained strict immigration policies. You can work in Japan, but if you're not Japanese, immigration is virtually impossible. This hardline stance is not taken in the story of complicity, in which a Chinese man illegally immigrates to Japan and gets a job making traditional Japanese soba noodles. When the Chinese man's employer finds out, he freaks out because of possible trouble he could face with the police. But then everyone relaxes. Since Chinese or not, the young man is part of the family. In the era of the Donald Trump presidency, it is a temporary relief to see this story particularly coming from Japan, a country which is often accused of being insular and unfriendly to the rest of the world. It is so important to distinguish between the people and public policy, and cinema is a great bridge to do just that. Number 8. Zombie for Sale is the ultimate zom-com of the festival. Not to knock Zambura, but this is just set a bar higher for Asian zom-coms. It may be the best one yet, and obviously it comes from South Korea, a country who's now producing one of the greatest production systems outside of Hollywood. This is a film that looks at a family and what one does when an old relative gets a little funny. We've all been there, and the lengths we go to protect the family member basically doesn't differ. The visuals are really strong in the film, and the camera buzzes around at appropriate times, and they make the movie have a lot of flair, which is totally appropriate for a zom-com. In fact, this movie has pulse throughout its duration. To expect effects like The Walking Dead is unfair, and arguably the effects in this film are better because they've got more heart and soul in them, instead of being as slick or as high budget as possible. There also isn't all that much gore, and it is the family element that makes this film the best Asian zom-com ever. Number 7. It's a mad show. It's proof that Asian comedies can be pure gold. I love the screwball comedy style, never seem to die in Asia, and this contemporary take on how we consume media partially justifies the old style of humor. As someone who works in community radio in Ontario, which may be done in a matter of months, it has the impacts to resonate with how far one will go to keep content exciting. It means devoting your whole life to your content. It's essentially a bitter fight to the end. The gig economy is applicable to media, and frankly, no one knows anything as to what is steady money these days. It's interesting to see the rise and steady suppression of individual iconoclasts on the internet by old media told from this part of the world. The specificity of show business will not disqualify you from watching this. It is the manner of the comedy. But if you like zany, well, this is certainly that. Number 6. Another Child is a story about two young girls discovering that their mothers share a male lover. It's low on mood and high on structure, and that is meant as a compliment. The writing makes the story flow just as well as a formulaic Hollywood one. It is psychologically strong, as well as showing the process stemming from this betrayal. It goes from pain, anger, acceptance, being overwhelmed, then acceptance, in a very sophisticated way, which is further proof of the strength of the South Korean film industry. Everyone has a character voice in this and is sympathetic. Even the cheating father, to an extent, though he is vilified, he is entitled, so we can at least understand where he's coming from, despite not approving of his adultery. If you are into drama, this has got it, and there's plenty of lightness for that nice balance. So while the story is a serious one, it is not grief porn or wallowing in melodramatic despair. It shows a journey that is strong. Another Child is certainly one of the better films playing at the festival, which should make you want to see it, especially at the Bytown Cinema in my town, Ottawa, Ontario. This is proof that foreign serious dramas are not exclusive to Europe. Number 5. American indie director Jim Jarmusch once said that the art form that film most resembles is music, since both mediums exist in time. And jam is evidence that cinema at times can be a free-form sort of expression, just like jazz music. A regular person trying to make amends, and Yakuza going for a revenge, are all linked to this film by circumstance, making the film a strange and somewhat sublime experience to watch. The first and third acts are particularly strong, with some interesting wandering in the second part, making it certainly strange, but not necessarily distinct. In terms of free-form style of film, it is middle of the road. It may be a love or hate it thing for many people, but for those who are supposed to love an experimental style, it ends up neither very radical nor very fulfilling. So for what is could be seen as a middle of the road experience. The strength is really the visuals in the film. They are both memorable images, all cut well together. So for fans of weird Japanese movies, this will certainly satisfy you. And if this is your first time watching this style of film, it might blow your mind. Number 4. We're talking about the movie Mr. Long. A Taiwanese hitman named Long comes to Japan to kill a bunch of guys with a small knife for who knows why, and then at the end of the film, the remaining gang members find the hitman to try to kill him, and they all get killed by the same blade. Sounds like a very standard setup for a Japanese gangster film. However, what distinguishes this film is the vast majority of it is that Long spends in a small town with friendly folk trying to lay low. When Long barely survives the first act of violence, a small boy gives him some medical aid, and Long continues to live amongst the friendly people, as well as take care of the young boy, along with his troubled yet beautiful mother. There's much more attention to trying to help than destroy in this somewhat unorthodox gangster film, which may be more of a family drama more than anything, despite the overwhelming excitement in the action. The film is most reminiscent of Takeshi Kitano's Sonnet scene, in which Japanese hitmen do a job in Okinawa, to then lay low by the beach, to then reveal that they are not as tough as nails and are really just as soft as anyone else. It is the vast middle period, which is neither wasted nor meandering in Mr. Long or Sonatine, but definitive of the story, which is tough people trying to do either the right thing or get in touch with themselves, that is so interesting. The final action choreography is a necessity, but this approach to storytelling is so refreshing, vibrant and alive, that it is beautiful to see a generation after Sonatine that this is now a trope in Japanese cinema. Gangster cinema is very exciting, but also it's been done to death, so to see a humanistic gangster is both appealing and a relief. How often must we be shown gangsters only committing crime instead of living life in between horrific acts? Number 3. The Gun is a Japanese youth movie, and it might prove to be very intriguing to you. It is shot in black and white and looks at the curiosity attached to a gun and the possibility of violence. Our protagonist, Toru, is drifting through his post-secondary experience, and this possibility for destruction through meaning or possibility without occupies his mind in the movie. The use of black and white in any contemporary movie is a curious aesthetic. I believe it works in this case to show an emotionally fatalistic, slow-paced, and deliberate film. To want to inflict pain out of randomness isn't what it seems. It is simply a lack of direction and youthful angst that sometimes consumes us. The metaphor of sex as a form of violence manifested by the possession of the gun was the strongest part of this film, in my opinion. It is an economically effective movie that is worth your time. Number 2, Iron Monkey is a film from 1993 and was part of the Quentin Tarantino Presents series that some foreign or independent films got from the 90s to the 2000s during Harvey Weinstein's Miramax days. It played on 35mm at the New York Asian Film Festival with director Yuen Woo-pin in attendance. And what a treat that was for the audience. However, here we can only watch it on home video and still appreciate it. It stars Donnie Yen of Rogue One fame. And while it's a very run-of-the-mill wuxia production in the writing, it is all about the Yuen Woo-pin choreographed action, which remains to this day an incredibly fun experience, especially the pull and pit of fire fight in the end. It tells the Robin Hood story of righteous vigilantes taking down the corrupt and greedy government, which may not be anything new, but everything in the fights is big and fun, leaving no room for subtlety, but plenty of time for laughs. This may not be as innovative as Yuen Woo-pin's work with Jackie Chan, or as inspired as his work for Jet Li, but Donnie Yen has finally gotten some Western recognition with the Ip Man movies as well as Rogue One, and this film will deliver the goods for you. Granted, if you have no interest in period kung fu movies, this will change nothing for you, but if you're looking for a good time with awesome fights, and like that ridiculous dubbing to be found in these films, you are certainly in for a good time. Number 1. There is quiet and poetic Eastern mysticism present throughout Jinpa, which gives this incredible, straightforward story and leaves a lot for the viewer's sensory perception. The story is a man named Jinpa picks up another man named Jinpa in his truck to go into the next town to catch Bean. Hitchhiker Jinpa plans on killing the man who killed his father. He is sincere and committed, while Jinpa the driver does not believe he has the temperament to pull off such a bold move. The film takes place at the Kekexili Plateau in Tibet, which might seem like a place so off the grid that it isn't recognizable as planet Earth, and the simplicity of the plot allows for atmosphere of the setting to dominate the film. The locals wear clothing from another era, and the actors themselves don't know how to be anything other than this, which gives the film a magic that is never seen in a contemporary Hollywood film. The film was produced by Chinese filmmaker Wong Kar-wai, who has made many films worth your time, such as Days of Being Wild, Chungking Express, and In the Mood for Love. So it is no wonder that even films he produces possess magic that will never leave you once you have seen it for yourself.